Hello there everyone, it's Nina Marie. Thanks for joining me today for another video. Today is a special day in Simon Says Stamps world. It's STAMPtember 2nd and we are having a party to celebrate STAMPtember. And we'd love to have you join us. If you want to go over to my blog, you can get more details about the party. But there are many designers who are participating with loads of inspiration using the Simon Says STAMPtember release. And to make the party that much more special, we have free gifts along the way, like a scavenger hunt. So there are many different free gifts that are scattered across the party. And the one I have to share with all of you is this Simon Says Stamp exclusive Simon's Potty stamp and die set. It's a really cute stamp set, and then of course there are the coordinating dies. To redeem your free gift for this one, you have to spend $100 or more, but the instructions for redeeming are on screen on the left, and you can also look at this graphic on my blog too. I encourage you to go over to my blog to check out more details about the party, but you can also see still shots of the projects that we'll be creating today. So what am I going to create to share for STAMPtember 2nd? I love the blackout technique, which is a fun way to get a really cool effect for your embossing folders. However, I thought it would be fun to kind of step outside the one ink pad, and oftentimes everybody uses black, myself included. So I thought if I pulled out a bunch of different ink cubes, I could create something really unique. And that's the two cards we'll be sharing in today's video. So let's talk about the embossing folders first. I have these two brand new folders from the Simon Says STAMPtember release. This one is stitched flowers, and then I also have dotted spiral. The dotted spiral is really cool, and that's actually what's inspired me to do this entire technique. I looked at that dotted spiral and I saw that swirl pattern, and I thought, could I follow that with my ink cubes? So I'm going to put some white cardstock inside of my embossing folders. This is Simon Says Stamp 120 pound white cardstock, and I'm going to run both of these embossing folders through my die cut machine for the embossing folder setting. These are 3D embossing folders, so you just want to make sure you adjust your machine for that particular type of embossing folder. Once I run them through, you can see we have our beautiful patterns embossed into the paper. For the technique, we want to use the side of the paper that has the design pressed in. So this side is the raised, and then the back side has the design pressed into the paper. That's really important because we need that for the technique. So see how the flowers are pressed into the paper and how the dots are pressed into? That's the side of the paper we're going to work with. And for this technique, you don't need any particular type of ink color. I would suggest digging through your ink cubes and finding a bunch of colors that make you happy. So I'm going for a rainbow here, and as you can see, it's not a perfect rainbow, but I wanted to use some bright and happy colors. For the ink cubes today, I'm using Simon Says Stamp Positively Saturated inks. I'm going to take the flower pattern first, and for this one, I'm just going to swipe over each individual flower. Now you do want to be careful that you don't press too hard so that you end up with ink actually inside the flower. I was a little bit aggressive at times with how hard I was pressing. So you want to try to keep a light hand if you can, and then just swipe over each flower with a different color of ink cube. And you want to let them overlap so we get this really cool block pattern. It's a really pretty effect, and I also love that you can see the strokes of your ink pad. Kind of almost feels like a brush stroke. I'm going to go through each one of these flowers with a different ink cube and give this pattern a complete once over. If you need to go over a couple of times, that's okay. You don't need to do just one swipe with your ink cube. You just want to be careful that you don't overlap too much into the next color so that you lose the swatch you've already put down. But then you end up with this really awesome background that looks super cool. Kind of reminds me of like a patchwork quilt, which that thought is going to come into play later on as we go along. So now let's move on to the dot spiral. This one, I want to follow the swirl of this pattern. So I'm going to take my ink cube, start in the middle, and then kind of swirl out to the edge. Once you get the hang of it, it comes along pretty fast. So then once you get the first swipe down, you just keep following that as you go along. And this isn't following the pattern 100% perfectly, but it's mimicking the movement that this folder has. And that's going to help create that really cool spiralized effect. And if I need to, I can go back over my different sections with the ink cube. I'm trying not to, but there are some spots where I wasn't perfect with my placement, so I just went back in and went back over an area that I just put ink down. So you're gonna go around the entire folder with all of your little ink cubes, and that'll end up at the other end of where you started, and you've got this awesome background that just has so much movement. It feels like a total party. I love how this turned out, and it's such a unique way to get that blackout technique, but with a lot of color. So you're definitely creating a splash with these backgrounds. So I'm going to lay aside the dotted spiral pattern. We're going to enhance our floral. Now I'm going to bring in some embossing ink. This embossing ink pad, we're going to tap across our paper. The ink that we've already put down onto the paper is completely dry, and I'm going to press the embossing pad over top of the entire folder. I am not going to drag this embossing pad. I want to just make sure I get ink only on the raised areas of my embossed design. Once I've covered the paper with a bunch of embossing ink, then I can take some clear sparkle embossing powder and sprinkle that over top of the wet ink. And then I'm going to take my heat tool and set this. So my heat tool is nice and hot. I've brought it over to the paper and I'm starting to melt that embossing powder. You could also use just a clear embossing powder, but the effect that we're trying to get is, one, it's enhancing that color. So that color is now just popping off of this page even more than it already was. And the other thing that we're doing is, because I'm using a clear glitter embossing powder, we're gonna have some sparkle on this background, and that was what I was going for. I wanted this background to have a little bit of sparkle and shine. So we've got the shine from the embossing powder itself, but then there's glitter trapped inside, which looks super cool. So I'm going to turn both of these backgrounds into cards, starting first with the flower pattern. Like I mentioned earlier, I thought this reminded me of a patchwork quilt, so I'm going to lean into that as I embellish my background. So I've cut this panel down to be a little bit smaller than an A2 card. I'm putting it onto a side folding A2 card. And then if you notice, I have some buttons scattered about. So these buttons are things that I found in my stash, and I thought they would be the perfect little embellishment for the centers of each of my flowers and really tie in that patchwork effect. So I'm going to use some Simon Says Stamp Craft Tacky Glue, and I'm going to put adhesive down in the centers of each of these flowers and then lay my buttons into that wet adhesive. The Simon Says Stamp Craft Tacky Glue is a nice thick adhesive, and it holds embellishments really well. So if you've got something a little bit heavy and you do want to use a liquid glue for it, this is a great adhesive to reach for. So I'm going to lay all my buttons around the flowers, and you can see how they look super cute framing up the center of my card. The center is blank though, so why did I leave it blank? Well, that's where I'm going to put the sentiment. You may recognize this stamp set. This is the Big Scripty Greetings stamp set that has been available at Simon Says Stamp for many years. It's a classic and absolute favorite, but the thing it was missing was coordinating dies. So we now have coordinating dies for the Big Scripty Greetings stamp set, which you can now get over at Simon Says Stamp. So if you have the stamp set, definitely you're going to want to grab the dies, but if you've never grabbed this stamp set, now's the perfect time to do so because there are dies for it. So I'm going to stamp this sentiment onto some black cardstock using embossing ink, and I'm going to emboss my sentiment with white embossing powder. And then I'll heat set that, and then use the coordinating dies to cut out the sentiment. The dies have a lot of details, so you're going to be able to get in between the different letters, which is an effect that you can't get very easily by fussy cutting. So I love having coordinating dies to get super fine details like this. And then off to the side, I'm digging through some Easy Strips birthday sentiment strips that I had from the Simon Says Stamp September card kit. I had already cut these from previous projects, but I have all these now ready to go. So I'm just going to pick one out, and I'm going to use that as a sentiment to pair up with my happy birthday greeting. I am popping up that happy birthday greeting with some foam squares. I've got black 3D foam squares, and I'm doing 2 layers so that way I have some really good dimension off of this background. This will be a very bulky card to mail, so I'll have to put this in a padded envelope. But it's for somebody's birthday, so we have to go all out. So now I'm going to foil my little sentiment that we were picking out for the card. I love using Simon Says Stamp sentiment strips with my foils to do some toner foiling. I have my Gina K fuse machine off to the side heating up and putting the sentiment and a piece of deco foil into a carrier sheet, and then I'll run this through at a heat setting of 3. That setting I find works really well for my machine when I'm doing foiling on these cardstock sentiment strips. I let that cool for a minute before taking it out of the carrier sheet, and then I'll peel back the foil to reveal our cute little sentiment. This is going to look perfect centered up underneath of our large happy birthday. To adhere this, I'm just going to take a few dots of Simon Says Stamp Craft Tacky Glue and place the sentiment into that adhesive. I did trim it down just a little bit, but I followed the banner ends so that way I could keep the same look, but it was a little bit shorter so it wasn't hanging over my buttons. So here is card number 1. I just love the intense color that we have here, which was really enhanced by that embossing ink. And then the fun details like the buttons are such a cute effect. This is such a unique way to create the blackout technique, so I hope you're going to try this idea out. Then of course the swiping one where we created the swirls, that one's another fun way to create the blackout technique. And we got to finish this off into a card. So let's jump on in and do that next. I have the You Are Magic die set from Simon Says Stamp's STAMPtember release, and I'm going to cut this from not only some black cardstock for the shadow layer, but then I'm also going to use white glitter cardstock to cut out the words. So I also am going to cut the You Are Magic sentiment from some white cardstock as well, because I do want to pop this up a little bit off of the shadow layer. So by just cutting from some plain white cardstock, that's going to give me a base that I can go ahead and lay the glitter layer into. So I'm stacking these up, it's 2 layers, and that'll be a perfect amount of lift off of the shadow. The shadow layer is a really nice dark black. This is Simon Says Stamp So Very, Very Black cardstock, which is really nice cardstock. I did put a clear block on top of my sentiment as I was adhering things together so that way the sentiment had a chance to bond. I'm popping up that entire sentiment onto my card using foam squares. Again, I'm using the black because I have black cardstock, and that hides really nicely. Off camera, I had die cut a whole bunch of little stars from some holographic cardstock, and this is going to be the perfect embellishment to pair up with some sequins and create a beautiful burst effect. So I'm putting some craft tacky glue onto my paper and then laying the stars into it. I like the craft tacky glue for this because the craft tacky glue, like I mentioned earlier, is thicker, and so when you put that down, you can lay your paper into it and it actually will dry with a little bit of lift. So you didn't have to use any foam squares to get a little bit of a shadow underneath to get the dimension, but that liquid glue will dry with that form and it will allow you to still have that dimension, which is kind of cool. And then I also mixed in some Star Bright sequins from Simon Says Stamp around those stars to create even more sparkle and shine to this background. This background feels like we're going into a portal. It's super cool. I love the effect that this provided by following that pattern with our ink cubes. So there are 2 ways to use the blackout technique to create really unique effects for your cards, and with the best part, color. So I encourage you to try this out, step outside the box, and use many colors to create some unique effects with your embossed designs. Don't forget, you can participate in the Simon Says Stamp STAMPtember party. I love this party because it's filled with inspiration, so you can go around and see all of the different ideas that the many designers who are participating are sharing today. Always an inspiring event, so I hope you will check it out. Don't forget that you can find the full details about the party over on my blog, plus still pictures and more about my project. Thank you so much for watching today's video, friends. I'm so excited that you came by. I will be back very soon with more to share, but until next time, I hope you have a wonderful day.